Chapter 1, Segment 3 begins by talking about the history of research on the brain and behavior. It wasn't until recently that scientists figured out the key role that the brain plays in human behavior. In about 1300 BCE, Tutankhamun was an Egyptian pharaoh that was mummified. They only preserved his liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, and heart, where the brain was taken out through his nostrils and thrown out because it was not considered to be an asset for him continuing his life in the afterlife. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament also do not mention the brain, but only the heart. Aristotle in about 350 BCE believed the heart was where your mental capacity lies. This is where we get words such as kind-hearted, open-hearted, faint-hearted, hard-hearted, and heartless, and that we learn things by heart. He thought that the brain was only used to cool down the blood temperature from the heart. Herophilus in about 350 BCE was also known as the father of anatomy. He dissected bodies of both people and animals and stated that each region of the body has its own separate nerves. Galen, also known as the father of medicine in about the 2nd century, when treating the gladiators who had had injuries as patients, when their behaviors changed after the injury, he traced it back to the brain. He never dissected humans, so his anatomy of the brain is inaccurate. Chapter 1, Segment 3 also talks about the Renaissance scientists beginning to understand brain anatomy. Leonardo da Vinci included the nerves in the arm and fluid-filled ventricles in the brain when drawing the human body. Anatomists during the Renaissance, when drawing the brain, emphasized the outer portion of the brain because it was the easiest to see after they removed the skull. Michelangelo thought that the brain was God's greatest gift to mankind, so on his painting of the Sistine Chapel, put God in a brain-like shape when coming down to Adam, the first man. René Descartes' book, On Man, talks about how animals and humans can behave like machines. He also spoke about the idea of spinal reflexes and their neural pathways. He believed that the mind and body come in contact with the pineal gland because of 2 reasons. 1, it's not in 2 hemispheres, it's a whole being. And 2, he believed it didn't exist in animals, only humans. He didn't publish his book because he feared the Catholic Church would execute him. Descartes strongly believed in dualism, and that if people really were more than just a complicated machine, they couldn't make the free will choices the church thinks they can. Dualism is that mind only deals with the spirit, and the body deals with the real world such as material objects. Neuroscientists don't believe in dualism because they think that what goes on in the mind can actually happen in the brain and the material world. This segment also talks about the concept of localization of function arising in the 19th century. Thomas Willis convinced people that the brain controls behavior. Phrenology was a popular concept in the 19th century that backed up Willis's idea that the cerebral cortex has different ideas that were different for each behavior. Some of these examples are love of family, perception of color, and curiosity. Other people didn't believe this, they believed that the brain functions as a whole. And today we know that the brain is active even when we are doing the simplest of tasks, but during different tasks, the brain activates different regions. Paul Broca was a French surgeon that argued that language wasn't a function of the entire brain, but only a region. He used the autopsy of a patient that couldn't talk for several years, and the only portion that was damaged seemed to be the front portion of the brain on the left side. This area is now known as Broca's area. The concept of behavioral neuroscience emerged from William James's book, Principles of Psychology. Modern behavioral neuroscience arose in the 20th century. There were many critical advances in the end of the 19th century for behavioral neuroscience. Hermann Ebbinghaus learned how to measure memory and learning in humans. Edward Thorndike learned how to measure memory and learning in animals. Ivan P. Pavlov researched conditioning in animals, and Shepard Franz removed different parts of the brain regions in animals to try and find the location of learning and memory. In this section, consciousness is a thorny problem. Consciousness is defined as being awake and aware of surroundings, existence, and experience. Adam Zeman said all scientists agree on some aspects of consciousness. These aspects are that consciousness matters in important things like planning what might happen. Consciousness is bound up somehow in brain activity. Some of our brain activity is unconscious, and we are not aware of the activity. The deep parts of the brain are important for arousal, and the top part of the brain is responsible for what we might experience in the moment.